Heyo, for a while now, I've had a disdain for political labels. Every time I meet someone and they tell me which political label they identify with, I begin to have assumptions about what that means. But somehow I always end up wrong, especially since I've learned that most people, or at least the ones I've run into, don't actually know what the political label they're using even means, since everyone uses them differently. Whenever I used to watch political content online that pretends to be deep, like random example, Jubilee, I've noticed that they tend to use political labels broadly or interchangeably. Democrats, liberals, and leftists are all treated as the same thing because they're blue, and conservative, MAGA, and Republican are all treated as the same thing because they're red. I know that you can be both conservative and MAGA, but I also know that liberal and leftist are two different political labels, to the point where leftists get annoyed if you assume that they're a liberal. It is a little ironic for online leftists to get so hot and bothered about people using political labels wrong, since I've seen a lot of those same leftists use conservative and fascist interchangeably, but apparently a concerning amount of conservatives think they're the same things too for some reason. Still, my point stands that shallow but entertaining content like that affects how people see politics. I know it's pretty obvious that these videos are for pure entertainment and rage bait, and not for genuine political curiosity, and I don't necessarily blame anyone for enjoying these kinds of low-stakes political debates, especially since I'm sure that most people just like watching someone debunk things in a satisfying way, or they watch these to use the points in the debates to apply them in other situations for either activism or just in interpersonal arguments. But I especially don't like Jubilee because despite claiming to provoke understanding and or creating human connection, the only people they seem to platform are closed-minded people, and that includes their woke college students as well. It just seems like the only people who seem to enjoy these debates are the ones who are performing them as simply just debates, or the ones that are watching them as performances. The video that finally made me figure out why I specifically hate Jubilee's way of handling controversial topics was their video with Ben Shapiro. Now, I don't like Ben Shapiro. I personally just see him as a debate bro that uses petty tricks against his opponents, who are usually inexperienced college students, to win the debate. I kinda doubt that he takes anything he says seriously and mostly just wants to look smarter than everyone else by talking fast and twisting people's words. So when I saw the trans man, whose name's Shane, confidently come up to debate Ben while using the same underhanded tactics, I couldn't help but be disappointed. I'm all for throwing dirty tricks back at someone who uses them first, but I think the reason why Shane's way of debating bothered me so much was because it was very obvious that he was trying to mimic Ben Shapiro's debate style, but he just didn't do it that well. What's that thing that Mark Twain said? Never argue with stupid people. They'll drag you down to their level and beat you with experience. Well, Ben did the very classic don't answer any questions straightforwardly and disagree with everything my opponent is saying thing throughout the entire video. I really don't think the move should have been change topics as quickly and as many times as possible and don't let my opponent talk so they don't get a chance to disagree as a defense. I know the point was to give Ben a taste of his own medicine, but I just think it was executed in a way that didn't make any sense, especially since the actual words and point he was making wasn't very convincing or even confusing enough to make it look like it was convincing. His argument was only something that trans allies and pro-choicers would agree with, and I know that to be true because everyone who wasn't either already a trans ally or pro-choice hated it. But for some reason, so many people that were in that video cheered and clapped when Shane was just having a one-sided rant, and then again, so many people online who very clearly hate Ben Shapiro loved it. And I have a feeling that the only reason they liked it was because they liked seeing Ben Shapiro uncomfortable and interrupted. Of course, I'm not trying to mean any disrespect against Shane or even Ben Shapiro, because debating in general on the spot is very hard to do. Like, I know for a fact that if I was either in one of those chairs, I think I'd start crying. But I just don't like it when I see political content that's so performative to the point where even if I agree with you, it seems fake, if that makes sense. Apologies for using the performative buzzword, but in my defense, I know my feelings are valid considering I saw this video where Ben was talking about his experience on Jubilee, and he mentioned that the people who were clapping and cheering for Shane for going off on Ben went up to Ben to tell him that the debate was fun and asked for pictures. I'm sure that the hostile tone of everyone in their video was partly due to Jubilee's editing to cause more outrage and annoyance, but I also feel like the rest of it was just people treating politics like improv theater. I know I shouldn't complain about political opinions on the internet because, you know, but my problem isn't really just people having different political opinions, but rather the fact that the only opinions I saw on the left was praise because, yeah, Ben Shapiro, he should never speak again, while the opinions on the right was critique, but it was just, I f***ing hate trans people, look how emotional they get. He was talking about SA and abortion rights, which are things that directly affect how his life could go. I would hope that someone gets emotional about something like that. But I just think the way that he talked about it in a debate setting wasn't effective. But unfortunately, that was not a popular opinion. And that was a repeating pattern for me, where I just felt like I wasn't resonating with a lot of online leftist opinions, so I thought maybe I'm not as leftist as I think I am. I mean, it is commonly known that America's normal is leaning right, so maybe I'm just more centrist than a real leftist. So I looked up a couple couple videos of people talking about leaving the left to see if I resonated with any of their experiences. First was this woman who pretty much claims that she was an SJW before turning into a Trumpy because she grew tired of other people claiming that she was a victim, but even when she tried saying that other people were victims of whatever phobias or isms, she couldn't think any deeper than oppression happened in America while listing off the buzzwords and string of words she memorized without actually understanding them. She and her partner asked themselves what would be so wrong about supporting Trump, because a conservative told her that Trump actually gave all of his money to charity and never really said any of those racist things. I'm assuming she's talking about the Trump Foundation. You know, the charity that Trump used to pay for legal settlements for himself and to buy portraits of himself. The charity that the court forced to shut down and give all of its remaining money to real charities. I really hope she's not talking about that one, because that would mean she did no research in order to back a figure that she consciously knew at one point was extremely controversial. I can give the tiniest bit of grace to the racist thing because I know a lot of people believe his social media is managed by the worst social media manager in the world, since he sometimes doesn't act like how he does on social media. But also, he got sued by the US Department of Justice for refusing to rent to black tenants and instructed his staff to mark applicants from black people with a C for colored in 1973. He paid for full-page ads in the NYC newspapers demanding the execution of 5 innocent black teenagers in 1989, and he said, "Why are we having all these people from shithole countries come here?" when referring to Haiti and African nations in a White House immigration meeting in 2018. If the only reasons you have for supporting Trump are he's given away his money to a charity and he's never been racist, I have some really bad news for you. It is a little frustrating to see someone whose political beliefs shattered when seemingly one conservative challenged their beliefs just because they didn't learn how to look things up, play up their political thoughts like optics, but also basically pretend to be a free thinker just because they got tired of repeating a couple talking points they didn't understand in the first place. I've watched plenty of these kinds of videos before, but they typically do their research first before getting on camera to be annoyed at their previous political party for being stupid and unreasonable. Which reminds me, I saw this other woman talk about how she basically used to be the woker. She was the classroom feminist, pro-BLM, very anti-gun, to the point where she wanted to get rid of all guns, which is a little ironic considering the saying, if you go left enough you get your guns back. But she also states herself that she didn't think about the nuance, and that's something that I can generally resonate with. I continuously get frustrated with people being black and white and not thinking about the nuances. But as she continued, it seems as though she has not changed in that aspect. She mostly complains about how she doesn't understand trans people, and when she first started asking questions about it, she didn't get the answer she wanted. While I understand that it's super annoying and frustrating to deal with unrelated answers from flawed people, Googling things is also free. If you want to know something, you know the place to get the answer, and that place should not be Fox Entertainment News. And honestly, some of the questions she asked could also be solved if she just thought about it a little bit deeper than she clearly has. She said that she heard news of children being medicalized and thought, we don't let children drink, drive, smoke, or get married, so why can they transition? 3 out of the 4 things she lists can be done by minors with parental consent and or supervision. You can get married as a minor in most states with parental permission, kids can drink alcohol at home with their parents in many places, and I'm pretty sure she knows what a learner's permit is. But more importantly, she compares recreational activities and legal contracts to medical care, and we absolutely let minors make medical decisions with their parents and doctors. Kids get cancer treatment, psychiatric medication, and even undergo surgery sometimes. And when it comes to gender-affirming care specifically, kids can't go to school and come back with a brutal operation, surprisingly. I mean, there are plenty of parents that don't allow their kids to transition socially, let alone medically, but the ones that do support their kids have to go through so many doctors to then pass mental and medical evaluations before anyone even considers approving anything. And top surgery for minors is so extremely rare and requires even more layers of approval. But I'll give her some grace since she apparently doesn't know what searching things up means. I personally think it's a little ridiculous to hate on trans people, but I feel like she's not even a hater since she's just lying. If she truly believed what she was saying, you'd at least see some consistency, not just exaggerations and statements that don't align with reality. It's one thing to hate on a specific group of people, it's another thing to be a grifter. Which brings me to another woman I saw. When explaining why she left her old political label, she uses the word Democratic and left interchangeably. But also in that video specifically, the opinion she has still sounds pretty left-leaning to me, so I don't understand why she calls herself a conservative in other videos and continuously glazes MAGA for honestly I don't even know. Someone asked her since going to the right side was any of the acceptance conditional, and she answered that the right had no terms and conditions for her to join, even though she also said that she wasn't joining the right. But she brings up the one example of her saying that she still strongly supports the LGBTQ, and every right-winger in her proximity was fine with that. I'm glad that her one belief that she holds is LGBTQ plus rights, if that's what she means at least, but it's also not a good thing to accept every single person that shares one trait with you, like calling yourself a version of right-wing. That's how you end up with as presidents and groomers in your church. As much as I can respect accepting people despite your differences to one another and hating on the group that oppresses you, with all due respect, The left is not the group that's oppressing you. The left runs a pretty strict program, but I can see why the phrase "I support LGBTQ" coming from someone who constantly idolizes Trump and other MAGAs, but complains about how leftists, liberals, and Democrats are all performative and fear-mongering tyrants that refuse to have real conversations with each other tend to fall on deaf ears. Because you can say whatever surface-level bullshit you want, but that kind of support just sounds performative to me. I want to support people figuring things out on their own and finding a label that sits right with them, especially if they're happy in right-wing spaces, because finding a community that validates you by itself isn't harmful. But I seriously don't think that political parties should be treated like a fan club where you get upset because people are being mean and then move to the other fan club. It's politics, man. Things are gonna get hostile and complicated. While I didn't relate to any of these people's reasons for leaving the left and joining the right, I still understand the sense of feeling like you don't belong in the group. I've been told in my personal life by my peers that I'm about as extreme left as you can get right before it gets to communism, since I believe that communism slips into authoritarianism a bit too easily in practice, and yet I've had people online accuse me of being a centrist, apolitical, Republican, conservative, and even a fascist apologist because I critique a lot of things that are either are left or could be argued to be left-wing, and sometimes because I give grace to people who call themselves Republicans and right-wingers. A while back, I posted some queer video, and it was mostly me ranting about the annoyance of respectability politics in the queer community, but I didn't want to generalize, so in the middle of the video, I said, and I'm not talking about gay people who happen to be right-wing just because they disagree with leftist policies, because a lot of them are bad, so I understand. I got a bunch of comments confused at that line and asked me to elaborate. I did elaborate for the first person who asked, and the only reason I said that was because I know I have like 2 moderate progressives that call themselves open-minded right-wingers in my audience too, and I didn't want to generalize against them, but a few people disagreed with the idea of being civil or excusing arguably good-hearted Republicans, even if they just disagree with leftist policies. I personally think that dismissing people based on a very vague political label that most people don't define to be the same thing is very unproductive and creates a lot more infighting within the middle class than what we should be fighting. I genuinely believe that we can get along with people even if we have different opinions, as long as we share the same morals. Like if someone believes people deserve housing, healthcare, and their dignity, but they come up with a different solution than me that doesn't scapegoat minorities or the 99%ers in this country, then at that point I don't care if they don't agree with everything that I say. Of course that depends on what kind of solution they come up with, since some people have very terrible, no good, horrible, very bad ideas, but I'm still aware that people don't exist as a monolith, especially in political parties or labels. There are people who call themselves right-wingers who aren't queerphobic, racist, or sexist, just like how there are people who call themselves leftists who are queerphobic, racist, or sexist, but just not in a traditional way. Leftists are people, and so are right-wingers, and some people can be annoying, exclusionary, and stupid no matter what their political label is. Back when I identified as a conservative, I realized that later on I was just simply apolitical that started leaning left more and more as I learned more about both social and economic politics. The only reason I claimed I was a conservative was just because I didn't know that much about politics and believed and sided with my parents on everything, because grown-ups always know what they're talking about, and also because I didn't want to be considered an SJW, because that's how shallow my politics were when it came to conservatism. When I actually started learning more about politics, my thoughts and behaviors changed as I learned more, because as much as it's easy to say that I haven't changed, it's the left/right that's changed, it really hasn't. Politics didn't change, it was always this intense. We just started knowing more about it, and it starts to make sense, but also be very intimidating. I would like to think that I'm a free thinker. I think we'd all like to think that we're free thinkers, but I also know that political labels get so weaponized to the point where they've become meaningless trigger words that gets associated with evil. Whenever the general topic of politics comes up, people like to say it's not left versus right, it's good versus evil. And in my comment section and leftist comment sections, that means they're leftist. But for creators who are right-wing, those comments mean that they're on the right. So which one's evil? In my opinion, neither, unless it gets too much, and the bar for when it becomes too much is subjective, but both sides only ever see too much from the other side to stop and think about the nuances. I've seen a lot of leftists hate on the phrase both sides are bad because they think people are saying that both sides are equally bad, which is fair since a surprising amount of people do think that. So in response, they become confused and irritated and might say something like, doesn't the left only ever care about free healthcare, housing, and food? Because they don't know what extremism actually looks like on the left, because they only ever see the reasonable stuff. Probably because it doesn't really happen in America, since it's typically far right here. But coming across closed-minded right-wing people online isn't really surprising to me anymore, but coming across closed-minded leftists was still pretty rare for me, and even then, they were never really idolized, since a lot of leftists tend to police other leftists to make sure everyone's acting right. But sometimes people that I assume to be leftists just get really silly for what they want to police. I remember seeing someone get upset in someone's comment section all because he worked at a Starbucks. Starbucks is one of the companies that's been allegedly linked to Israel and their actions against Palestine, and by association, a lot of pro-Palestine people are leftists. So a lot of pro-Palestine people have been boycotting these places, but I hope that we can all agree agree that we shouldn't blame the baristas for what the company of Starbucks is doing. I just think it's one of those things that sometimes leftists really don't know how to pick their battles, because I just really don't like how some people think that companies that consciously make business decisions to fund a genocide deserves the same treatment as a college student working their part-time minimum wage job. I understand the principle of it, but the workers are on our side. I feel like a lot of people lose the plot all because they get way too focused on the symbolic purity that they end up treating regular people like collateral. All the examples that I brought up before with people abandoning their leftist label behind all seem to be in agreement that other people who also claim to be leftists are the most annoying and unbearable part of being leftist, but they abandoned their values and believed comforting lies all because leftists were mean to them. And while the idea of that is a little funny, I still get that dealing with insufferable people gets exhausting. I completely understand and honestly encourage if you feel like you need to cut people off from different political parties, because not everyone wants to be a political teacher and not everyone wants to be patient with the arrogant and misinformed. And I wholeheartedly believe that you should never be forced to accept toxic or intolerant people in your life. I even have completely stopped talking to certain people and they only claim to be centrist. But I also don't think that people with blue political labels are required to do that to be considered a true whatever label they identify with. I think it's unreasonable to ask strangers that share the same political labels to not visit their families for the holidays just because you hate seeing red. Cutting off people is a personal choice, not a political obligation, meaning that you do it because it protects your peace, not because it makes you a true political activist. I still believe what's mostly considered to be leftist values, but I also don't really identify strongly with the left as in like a group identity, since for one, I'm just not into labels anyways, and two, I don't want to end up treating the left like a social club that I need to defend unconditionally, or even condemn those who I don't think practice leftism perfectly. But I don't know, that's just me. Laters.